How are you doing? Alright, this video will be a short one. I'll try to make it short, and I'll be paying attention to the very simple question: what is an imbalance, or what are imbalances, also called fair value gaps in the market? So the goal here is just to make you, one, understand what it is, two, how to identify them, and three, to know fair value gaps that are tradable and fair value gaps that are not. That's basically what the goal of this video is. So alright, let's dive right into it. Okay, fair value gaps are basically imbalances that occurs in the market due to basically market movements. It could be manipulated movement, it could be smart money signature, it could be anything. As long as there is really news, anything that causes a price gap, a price movement in the market is called what? That gap that is given in that serious spike is called what? A fair value gap. Let me give you a very example clear example of what gaps look like. Good, we have a very large one here. Okay, now fair value gaps are made up of at least three candlesticks. At least three candlesticks. Yeah. So now when a candlestick forms, and that candlestick, like this, in this scenario here, so as I was saying, when these three candlesticks come together and there is a gap between the first and the third one, basically a fair value gap has formed. There is no mystery. It's one strong mystery behind it. Let me open up this chart so you get my point. Alright, now look at this. Although this is a large fair value gap, I'm just using for examples and what emphasis sake. Now look at this. This first candle not touching this last candle here, this third candle, creates a gap in between this candle. Creates a gap. So this gap here is otherwise called what? A fair value gap. And one thing we know about the market is price will always what? Draw back to a fair value gap. Fair value gap has a way of bringing price back to itself, to what? Fill up the gap. In this case, price rallied back. Look at this, inside the gap, dumped before this break of structure here happened, then an inducement. But that's a story for another day. Now, fair value gap are tradable, why some are not. In this case, if you entered a trade here, if you entered a trade here in the middle of this fair value gap, I like taking the middle of the gap. It will be a large trade in the middle of this fair value gap, with consideration, with your stop loss above the fair value gap, of course, with consideration to the fact that an inducement formed here and price will come back to it. You will get a 1:1 risk take profit, risk reward in this show. But that's not how I trade. I'll just give you an example of how fair value gap works. When I trade fair value gaps, I trade them in line with structures. So let me give let me paint a scenario. Yeah. Now look at this break of structure that happened here. Look at this break of structure that happened here. This break of structure. Let me go to a higher time frame. Now look at this. A break of structure happened here. When we go down to a 15 minutes time, a 5 minutes time frame for clarity, so that you get the details of it. Now there is what? Liquidity in this environment. There is liquidity in this environment. There is what? Under liquidity in this, let me mark them out. There is liquidity in this environment. There is another liquidity. Yeah. in this environment. You're not equipped in this environment. Now pay attention. There are times when a fair value gap is a reason for a trigger, and there are times when liquidity on its own is a reason for a trigger. But mind you, whenever a value gap forms, price retraces back to the fair value gap. Now after this break of structure, there was an inducement. So basically, we know that this point is liquidity. But because this is previous liquidity, there is a high chance that price can stretch down to take out this liquidity. There is also a high chance. Now look at, pay attention to this. Pay attention to this. Now, as like I explained to you in this video, I said fair value gaps are formed by 3 or more candles, a minimum of 3 candles. And now when the first candle is not touching, okay, look at this space here. If you notice the first candle here and the third candle, they have a relationship. This one and this one has a relationship. This first one here and this one has a relationship. This one here, their wicks are touching one way or the other. But now look at this place. There is what? A fair value gap at this point. Now, do I trade fair value gaps on their own? No. I need a confluence of other things. Structure, order flow, where is the liquidity based? Where did the fair value gap form? Because it's not every fair value gap that is tradable. Now look at another fair value gap. These are potential interest points for what? Price. Potential interest point for price. So when you are trading a fair value gap, you first of all don't just say, okay, there's a fair value gap, then price will come back here. No, you analyze the general market structure first. It will now give you an idea where price will come to. Now, from this market structure, because of this inducement here, there's a higher chance that this fair value gap will be a reversal point. This liquidity and fair value gap here will be a reversal point. There is also a higher chance. There is a lower chance that price will come down to this one. Why? Because this was previous liquidity before an inducement. So technically, it's still possible to come back here. But know that if price comes to this one, it will be the fair value gap that will be holding price, while your stop loss will be under this liquidity because of this inducement. While in this case, this fair value gap will not hold. If price comes here, price will take out the liquidity generally, because taking out this liquidity here will not affect overall market movement, while taking out this liquidity here can affect overall market movement. And mind you, when price is hinged on a structure, it tries to fulfill it, unless there is a bigger player or a bigger news that decides to defile it. But most times, even the news plays along with structures. Before news happens, news gives you signatures of where it will go to with structures. But that's a story for another day. Are you with me? So there is no hanky panky to it. First thing you have to find out is, where did the fair value gap form? Because if a fair value gap forms at the top of a structure, mind you, that's it. It will drop price back to it. It might be an internal range liquidity, but at the same time, it's not a base of an entry point. It can be a base for an exit point. Some people trade liquidity to liquidity, internal range to external range liquidity. Some people trade fair value gap to fair value gap. It all depends on how you see it. Some people combine both of them like I do. So when I have a fair value gap, I maximize it. When I have liquidity, I also do what? I maximize it. Okay, let me check some. Now remember what I said. Fair value gaps are what? Imbalances, and it's very, very important to find out where those fair value gaps form. Now look at this break of structure. Look at this structure here. Look at this structure here. From this point to this point, down to this point, and then there's retracement where to this point. Yeah. Now pay attention. You realize that structure got broken at this point. At this point in this scenario I just drew. Now look at this. Pay attention again. When after price did a low, pay attention to where price came back to. This I took a trade from this morning. Look at where price came back to, where a fair value gap. Fair value gap. What did I explain a fair value gap is? A fair value gap is a gap in between the basic explanation for a fair value gap, so that if you see it, it's easy to understand it. Is what? A gap in between the first and the what? Third candle. So when I look at this case now, another what? Fair value gap. And guess what? Price did what? Came back to what? That gap. Yeah, price what? Came back to that gap. But that structure is not my focus. Yeah, this structure here is not my focus. This structure here is not my focus. But now look at my focus. Price came back to gap. For this one, this one played out well after price took out this play, but this top here is a protected point because of how the structure formed. It's not a liquidity point, it's a protected point. So price came back to the fair value gap inside it, and look at what price did. Price dumped. In this case, price got what? The fair value gap. I told you, price moves from what? A fair value gap sometimes to another fair value gap. Price can also move from a fair value gap towards a liquidity point. Now look at this. The internal range liquidity of this trade was taken out. After price took out the internal range liquidity of this trade, price decided to give us an inducement before retracement on the larger grand scheme on this particular price setup. Now mind you, there are fair value gaps that have as much as 4 or 5 candles. Yes, but mind you that if that happens, just know that it will form something like this. It will form something like this. So when it's forming, now mind you that the gaps at the point where the fair value gap setup finishes is the point where a lower candle touches a higher candle. So at any point now when a candle now forms this way, the fair value gap has finished. Now look at this. You notice that this candle is not touching this candle, yeah, and this candle here is not touching this candle. So there are 2 fair value gaps inside here. So how do I trade it? In this situation, what I do is to put my entry point at the tip of the second candle of this candle now that forms that fair value. I put my entry at this tip because market would like to validate both fair value gaps. Now because of this first fair value gap here, market might not come as much as getting this point, but I take this one. I take it. I will no longer put my entry at the center of this fair value gap, but I'll take it back to where the first fair value gap's center candle started. The same way now when there's a third fair value gap, and now what do? I use the second fair value gap. I use the center of the second fair value gap to get the 50% range of the full fair value gap, whether they are 3, whether they are 4. So the goal of fair value gap, very simple. It draws market back to itself. Market on its own, just like nature avoids void. Nature has a way of filling up void. The same way in the market, when there is void, when there is a space, when there is an imbalance, market has a way of going back to fill up that space. That's how forex works. That's how fair value gaps works. Alright, we'll be making more practical videos on how to trade fair value gaps. I'm trying to make this video short as possible, and see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have a lot you will enjoy. Take care of yourself and have a great one.